Is it working? Yes, it looks like it's working. Hello, everyone, and welcome to, I want to say, the latest episode of Second Sons, but it's not really Second Sons. We're here today to talk about the new restricted list that the Conclave released on Friday. And I am joined today by my longtime collaborator and good friend, sometimes co-commentator, Aaron Glazer. How you doing tonight, Glazer?
Talking in the intro,
Talk.
feeling like a boss.
Oh yeah. Well, again, it's not actually Second Son, so we get to do things somewhat differently here. And we're joined by the Grand Maester himself, the big poobah. I don't know. I can come up with a lot of things, but still the champion of my heart all these years later, Chris Schoenthal. How you doing today, Chris?
Doing all right, thank you.
I like the shirt, by the way.
Thank you. Yep. Coalesce Apparel.
Yeah, it's a really cool shirt.
Check them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yep. Supporting black-owned business and all kinds of good stuff. All right. So we're going to jump right in to talk about the restricted list, but I want to start us off by asking Chris an educational question. So, Chris, this isn't the same kind of restricted list like the one you all previously issued at the beginning of the Conclave's tenure or any of the ones that FFG has released. So how is this different than previous restricted and banned lists, and how does that new system work?
Sure. So there's a couple of quick points to touch on. The first and more obvious one is there's now a banned list, which I don't believe we've had a banned list in second edition at all. In first edition, there were cards that were banned from the format that were then released by FFG later in a reasonable form. But for second edition, I think that's a brand new thing. So there's a few banned cards. They're mostly, you'll see, they're mostly combo cards, cards that only matter to degenerate combo decks and degenerate combo players. And so we just took those out of the format. We did add a couple of agendas, Kingdom of Shadows and Sea of Blood, because they were sort of the dominant meta forces, and we felt like it was time for an important shakeup. So those are banned, at least for now. As I mentioned on Facebook, it is possible that they come back at some point, although unlikely that they come back in their current form. We may fix them up a little bit before we re-release them. So if you're looking for a military agenda, hold on tight. We'll get you one eventually. And then the second change that is a bit more drastic that I think Roy is mostly referencing is the addition of what people are calling pods. And so the way those work is essentially if you choose a restricted list or a restricted card that includes a pod, it essentially adds a couple additional cards to the rest of the restricted list, effectively banning you from playing those. So, as an example, if you were playing a Night's Watch deck and you wanted to play an attrition deck and you chose Yorin as your restricted card, Yorin would be your restricted card, so you couldn't take Bound for the Wall, you couldn't take Klytus because those are already restricted, and you couldn't play any of the restricted agendas or plots. But in addition to those, you also could not play Three-Fingered Hob and Craven with Yorin in the same deck. So those are just separated out, and essentially, if you pick Yorin, those are also on the restricted list and effectively banned for you to play.
Cool. Yeah, so it operates a little bit differently than some of the other games that have pod sort of systems do. So I think it's really important that we clarify things. And I will now put on the screen for viewers and stuff the current restricted list. So, Aaron, let's jump a little bit into sort of talking about big picture things. What do you think of this restricted list?
I think this is the best restricted list the game has ever had. I don't think it's even close. It completely tears up the meta, and it gets rid of the two, well, if we're not counting combo, which hasn't existed as a force in the game in several years, but it gets rid of the two most degenerate and unfun things in the game.
That would be Kingdom of Shadows and Sea of Blood, is what you're saying.
Yep. And Kingdom of Shadows required a lot of restricted cards and is still dominant, so just getting rid of it makes a lot of sense. And Sea of Blood is just completely the least fun play experience possible.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel a little bit like this restricted list deletes 2019 from the game. Maybe a little bit of like 2020 as well. These are definitely, I mean, although, was it 2018 actually when Sea of Blood came out? right? It was in the Greyjoy box, which was
Yeah, that was 2018.
2018.
Or maybe like very early 2019, like March or something.
Because it was I think the first big tournament I played in with Sea of Blood Legal was that year's War, and it was still kind of newish, I think.
So it was announced on the FFG site July of 2018. So presumably it probably came out
October. It was the fall
early.
box that year.
Yeah, something like that. So,
Yeah. Cool.
but
Yeah.
anyway, we've had the Scourge of Sea of Blood for
A whole
almost
lot.
almost 2 years now, a year and a half easily.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, and I agree. I think this is definitely one of the stronger restricted lists. I think that Sea of Blood and maybe it was after. Well, was there a hiatus? Well, wow, yeah. We're definitely showing our old man brains here, not remembering things well. But I think that the two decks, Sea of Blood and of course Kingdom of Shadows, like we've never been able to clear them out of the meta, and we've tried a variety of solutions. There was the one that obviously that the Enclave tried before. There's the one Glazer and I tried for the trial by combat. And neither of them worked particularly well. So it is good to just finally see them banned. So, Chris, to ask you a quick question about a couple of things. The Quotho pod. What's the logic of putting Womb of the World as part of that pod rather than just straight up restricting it? I think that's sort of like a pressure point that I feel is like maybe to me that card, maybe without Sea of Blood, maybe you found in your testing Womb of the World is only really degenerate with Quotho, but I feel like it's probably one of the few just like big spike cards that's left in the format.
So are you asking why Womb wasn't just like a regular?
Yeah, a regular restricted card.
It's something we considered. We definitely had some back and forth about Targaryen being hit harder in general. I think Hano noted in the article that we'd also discussed 6-cost Drogon being restricted as well. And I think just the general sense was that Sea of Blood was so overwhelmingly kind of the Targaryen agenda. And then with some sprinkling of Valyrian Steel, which, as you saw, we also messed with the Gifts of the Widow pod with the 8-cost Dany. And so I think we wanted to keep the sort of Targaryen aggressive Dothraki kind of strategy available, and I think it will still remain there, while letting people kind of shaking up the way people decided to play it. So, for instance, we also took overwhelming numbers off the list because that, while it's a very strong event, and it does pair well with Kotho, obviously, with that off of the list and Sea of Blood being banned, we might see that kind of played in a little bit of a fairer manner.
Less degenerate.
Exactly.
So I don't know what deck Dothraki is now. I don't know what agenda it's played out of. Like, that experimentation is to be encouraged, right? Like, maybe Dothraki is still busted, maybe Womb is still busted, but it has to be in a completely different deck. It's no longer doing the same thing in the same way. So, like, Womb and Overwhelming Numbers are degenerate-ass cards, but let's see them be busted in a different agenda. Because they've only ever been really so incredible in Sea of Blood.
Yeah, all those cards sort of came out around the same time. Granted, it was a little earlier, but there's kind of this constant, and it's funny because it actually happened in first edition as well, that right at the end of first edition's run, there was just this insane influx of extremely strong Dothraki cards, and by the time the first edition ended, Dothraki was like the top of the meta too. And so they kind of played out in the same manner in second edition, where it was just pack after pack was like, oh, here's another kind of really strong push Dothraki card. And so hopefully, like Aaron said, at least people will have to kind of look around to see what the best agenda plan is and where all these cards fit, because they don't have the easy answer available to them.
Yeah. I think it's likely Crossing, but
yeah, that was what I was about to say. We'll get to Crossing in a little bit.
That's a very different deck, right? Like, Crossing isn't especially aggro, and now you suddenly intrigue challenges matter where they wouldn't otherwise, and like there's not an abundance of intrigue icons in that deck. Like, I think this probably settles them down into just another very good deck instead of a dominant deck. I mean, when new cards come out, it's extremely likely that it's the first thing busted again. But for now, it should probably be fine.
Yeah. So Crown of Gold. I read your article. I think I'm not sure who was exactly responsible for writing it, but whether it was you, Hano, Jess, whoever did, I think did a really good job. But I was a little slightly confused by Crown of Gold, particularly when you mentioned the card that I think probably belongs in there instead, which is Drogon. Could you just expand a little bit more about Crown of Gold and why that card was restricted? Was it a fear of Dragon Pit? Kind of just immediately rising to the top with the Dothraki stuff. But what was the logic behind that?
I would say that Crown of Gold was something of, we'll say, a compromise choice. Um, Drogon was on our radar as something that could get hit too, but we also wanted to be careful to not just send Targaryen straight to the dumpster. And Drogon is a card that has controls available, right? Like, granted, it's a very strong card, and yes, it will swing games very quickly. But you can icon control Drogon, you can kneel Drogon. There are ways you can blank Drogon. There are things you can do to Drogon that don't apply at all to Crown. Crown, since its printing, has been just a point and click, kill this character dead right away. There's no real reaction or response you can take to it. And we wanted to take something from that realm away from the deck without completely kind of throwing it in the trash. So hopefully that helps there.
The deck, I don't think that deck is dominant enough anyway. Um, the only concern I have with this entire restrict list, I think Stark is very likely to be the best deck going forward.
Yeah, we'll get there. I want to talk a little bit about going forward.
Wait. So if Stark is so good, like Targaryen as a potential natural predator needs to also be kept relevant, which means that like this kind of hit is dangerous, right? Like if Stark gets better, not a lot deals with Skagos or Mira, etc. But Tard can relatively simply. So they should still be around and in the meta. Although, like then the Stark Tard game is very often a game of who draws what first, which remains not ideal, but that's inherent in the design of the entire game, I think.
Most card games. So let's jump to from the top faction to the bottom faction. So I think the other big change here is Tyrell. Finally, hashtag instead of hashtag free Mace, it's hashtag free Hightower. So Hightower is finally unleashed for those players who would like to play a busted for cost location without a green cards. Chris, before I'll turn it to Glazer a little bit and see if he thinks this means much. What was sort of the logic behind finally freeing at least one of those classic green cards?
So I think you mostly hit on it. It was just that they're already kind of by consensus the worst faction at the moment, and they and Lannister have been fighting for most of the course of the game for some sort of identity, and sort of the faction strengths, and so allowing Hightower to be put back into play for non-Mace decks, we're hoping will sort of allow them to open up, have some real strong options and a better faction identity going forward. Everybody, it's other than Mace, I've always liked playing Hightower, to be honest with you, and so I'm excited to build with it again. We also, I don't know if you saw this, but Old Town Informer is also in a pod with Annals of Castle Black now, so there's a little bit more card throughput to Tyrell, which has always been kind of one of their identity pieces, and this also helps on that front. So I'm pretty excited to build with some green cards.
Yeah, I wanted to when we get a bigger picture. I have actually some pretty strong opinions about where Tyrell is. So I don't want to talk a little bit too much, but Glazer, what do you think about this change?
It's fine. This should have been. This was the change to make it ages ago, right? Like if FFG was ever willing to do pods, this one seems exceedingly obvious. And I guess I'll save since we're waiting, but I guess I will save how Drell is as a faction for now.
All right. So Stark. Another big change is probably one of the other like terrors of 2019. Skagos has been unleashed, while I Am No One has been put on. What was the logic in that? In those, I think two big changes.
Yeah, I think that starting with I Am No One, it had become pretty ubiquitous in terms of Stark's card advantage engine, and so it some may see that as sort of a soft ban. Like it's kind of unlikely that Dex will pick I Am No One, although it's certainly possible, I guess, that Crossing could pick it still. Um, but just the kind of power level of that event and how it was mandatory essentially in Stark decks was something we wanted to get away from. And as for Skagos, you'll note that it's still in a pod with Wyman, and I think the Wyman Skagos, like all of that kind of giant stew of sacrifice synergy with Wyman and Mira and Skagos, and also the Bear Island Scouts providing essentially infinite bodies for all of those sacrifices. I think all of that just as a package was just too much. But Skagos is a neat card and allows for some cool plays. I saw today somebody already talking about being able to build a Skagos Direwolf deck, which is something that obviously we have not seen anywhere near relevant in the game, and so that would be neat to see. Sort of switching wolves out back and forth, perhaps even some interactions with like between a character version and an attachment version
So
would be cool.
why the decision to not make kind of like a super pod of Wyman, Bear Island Scouts, Skagos, and Mira? That kind of might free up a couple of things. I just I don't know because like or maybe slapping Skagos on with Mira because I think Mira Skagos is quite dangerous, particularly with some of like the predators of that being pushed out, like Mira being kind of garbagey against Kingdom of Shadows, frequently being a little like not enough against Sea of Blood. Um, if this list pushes things in like a flatter mid range direction, like Mira being able to be with her second best friend after Wyman, Skagos, it feels just like a little bit of a big risk. Was there any discussion about that?
I don't think there was any specific discussion there, although I think the I am no one restriction is also relevant to that discussion
That's
because
fair.
I would argue that I am no one is Mira's second best friend over Skagos potentially. Um, I also think that just in general, we were as you can kind of see between the results of the player survey and the kind of general malaise surrounding the game before this, we wanted to be kind of a little more cavalier in certain parts and kind of allow people to explore and find something like that. And if it's too much, well, there's going to be another list in 3 months. It's not a situation like in the past where we've had to wonder, okay, how long is this going to be a scourge for? Is FFG okay with this? We never knew, right? Because it was always like, is there a restricted list? Is there a restricted list? Surprise, there's a restricted list. Whereas now that we have it on a schedule, I think it allows us a lot of leeway in terms of testing different stress points in the meta. And I think this is one of those that kind of just allows us to be freer with some of these choices and fix them, in a timely fashion. But when players realize, they'll understand when it's coming. They won't have to wonder, okay, is Stark going to be good for the next year because FFJ thinks this interaction's okay. Um, so I don't know if there was any specific discussion regarding putting Skagos and Miri in a pod, but I didn't hear any personally. But I think that would be my response to that is, if it's a problem, we'll fix it in post, if you will.
Thoughts about the big Stark changes, Glazer?
Um, they're the worrying one. For 3 months, it should be fine, but they're where I would start looking. The with that, I don't know. I don't know how to talk about this without talking about their decks, and you don't want me to do that right now. So
Okay,
I'll just
that's
wait.
fine.
Like,
Then the final thing before we start talking about decks is the bin pack agendas, right? They were added one aloof, which kind is been added, I think, as a Greyjoy tax in
oh,
some ways.
and it made and it made them all legal, which is pretty goddamn big.
Yeah, it's huge. Like a huge, like I think that honest to goodness, that's the thing that's most exciting for me. I really love the bin pack agendas, except maybe aloof, but I think restricting aloof keeps it its power level. So, what, Chris? What was some of the logic behind finally making that step? And then maybe you could talk just a little bit about why aloof was the only. I believe aloof is the only one, right? That hit the restricted list here. I'm just double checking. Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
aloof, right?
Aloof was the only one that hit the restricted list, and I think you're mostly right that it was sort of a Greyjoy tax, if you will. That when people were there were a few tournaments that tried out the bin pack and tried these things out, and Aloof with Greyjoy was just kind of overwhelming. Like they have the highest and the highest top end in the game essentially in terms of power level keywords, things like that, and so having them be able to get all of their things cheaper and still take a card like Great Hall, which that was a discussion was making Great Hall a pod with Aloof, and we decided to just keep them both fully restricted for now. Just kind of keep the economy balance across the board reasonable. Um, but overall, I agree with your sentiments on the agendas. I think they're all really cool agendas. Knights is the one that it's not scary per se, but it's the one I like the least just because it has that kind of feel bad interplay when you're playing the mirror match.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to play with all of these, especially Dark Wings, Dark Words. It's nice to get that back. That's been a fan favorite since it came out, and I think will allow for some uh, dusting off of some of the kind of mediocre to bad events that we've had along the way. That always, it's funny because they started releasing champ cards, and every time they released like a an event that was like a neutral event and felt like about half a card, they're like, "Wow, we get Dark Wings back. This is going to be sweet. Like that'll go right in there."
I feel
It's like
like
we never just never got Dark Wings back, and now it's back, and so people can find all those gems again and start playing with that. So it should be really cool.
I feel like you could make a hell of a master clip of Glazer, me, or Will saying this event will be good when Dark Wings comes out on all those white book set reviews. So that's definitely the case. Aaron, any thoughts about the bin pack agendas?
No, there's they're gonna be good. I think we'll talk about them when we talk about specific factions and builds.
Well, that's where we will jump right into, Aaron. I will start with you. Where do you think, what, like on a strategic level, big picture, where do you see this restricted list pushing us in forward? What do you think we'll see at the next Next event, Feast for Crows 2, which is happening July 11th, or I believe, let me make sure that I don't screw up the name, which is the tournament that's happening July 4th weekend. Make sure I get it. It is Vase Bulgar, which is the weekend of July 4th. So not maybe ideal for Americans, but it's a Road to Stolic event that's the weekend of July 4th. So what do you think? Those two big tournaments that are coming up, they're going to be one in Europe, one in the U.S. to sort of kick off this restricted list, and it's force in the meta. What do you think we'll see, Aaron?
So, what I think we'll see, or what we can see, I expect that people are going to just play a silly amount of Stark Fealty because it's easy and built for them, and I don't think that people are as creative as we'd want them to be. Unfortunately,
That's such a classic Aaron answer.
the truth.
I love it. I'm not saying it's not the truth, Aaron.
Look, it's how Thrones has worked so far, right? Like, I don't think Stark is necessarily the best deck. I think that Stark Hollow Hill, Stark Assault, Targ Dragon Pit, Lanny HR, Terrell Knights, and Terrell Assault, and Targ Assault, and Barra Assault are all incredibly good decks that might be better than Stark Fealty, or at least as good as Stark Fealty, but people are going to have to build them from scratch, and I'm hoping people are willing to do so. Um, that's the single reason I have this concern about Stark Fealty. I would have hit it harder instead of less, because if any idiot can build it, any idiot will build it. And like now, it's not just like now it's like a dam onto experimentation. But I don't know if it's better than any of those other decks, and I think a lot of them have some real legs. I urge the Conclave to keep an eye on Crossing and Knights as being potentially dominant in the meta. If these changes slow things down too much, Crossing could just potentially run everything over, but who the hell knows right now? Greyjoy Crossing is going to be real, real good in particular. Uh, Overall, like, I think there's a lot of really, really good decks out there, and I think they're mostly relatively new builds.
Yeah. So I think for me, there's like two positive takeaways of where I think the meta is going. One, I think that there's a cool. There's a Tyrell Dragon deck that I think can maneuver around this restricted list. Very close to the kind of builds that were being played in the World Cup that will have to maneuver a little bit around, like Gifts of the Widow being restricted. But I think that with the loss, with Hightower now being opened, I think that there is some kind of like Renly, Randall kind of like Voltron build that, Old Town Informer is given back to you, if and some of the weird events that were unrestricted as well, like a bunch of those combo events. I think you can build a mid-range deck with a combo finisher, to quote like the classic Roy explanation of Really Good Thrones. I think that that has some like goldfishes that wins turn 2, but more frequently plays like a mace deck, where you have the goldfish where you win turn 2 or like into marshalling turn 3, but more frequently the game will go longer, but you have the ability to, once you get to 9 or 10 power, just degenerately win without your opponent being able to interact. That's where like I'm excited, and I hope that the Wamas of the world, or the Alex Blacks of the world, take a look at the Tyrell package, because I think that there are ways to maneuver around this restricted list to get some of those really degenerate interactions that I really enjoy. The other thing is, I think that this restricted list is really good for Baratheon, particularly Baratheon more mid-rangey control builds, which is also really exciting. I like watching those decks, having done commentary. I like playing those decks, and I think that like a lot of the good like Barra tools, like Emery Florent, who's a really powerful closer, but also is a good escape valve against some of the more aggressive decks like Tyrell, like Crossing, is also really good. I think a lot of its natural predators here were so powered down, while a bunch of those really good yellow cards that, like, I mean, this is the classic like whack-a-mole problem with how much the game power creeped at the end of 2019. The Barra box and the Targ box just are so power creeped that you whack all those the Targaryen cards down, and the Barra cards are rising up. So I think that that's the kind of the two places that I would look, and I hope to see at these next two tournaments. Kind of on the darker side, the bad side, is I agree with Glazer. I think Crossing is where I think Dothraki is going to go. I think that the Stark Crossing deck, losing I Am No One is a huge thing, but perhaps I still think that deck is really solid. There's some twists that could do it. I think Greyjoy Crossing, as Glazer mentioned, is also still really strong. I think that with the like a lot of oxygen, like a heat being taken out of the meta, Crossing decks always rise when that happens, because again, they're pretty easy to build. They have a built-in win condition into the agenda. And then the other thing, of course, would be those Knights decks. Wama, I know, was experimenting with a bunch of Knights agendas in tournaments that he was able to play, and I'm a little bit worried about either out of Lannister or out of Tyrell, some kind of just draw a billion cards Knight deck that's really hard for people to interact with, in a way that's similar to Crossing, but instead of speed, it has resiliency from the number of cards that you're drawing. So sort of that's where I think the meta is going, in like ways I'm interested in, and then ways I'm less interested in. Hey, Scotty, and welcome to the Kim Pyre in chat as well. Chris, what do you think?
I mean, I don't know that I have any special additions to your analysis. You're both much better at these sort of analyses than I am. I just put the cards on the table and and do my best. Um, I think that Glazer's point about crossing is well taken. I think that that's um, it's one of those agendas that when it's at the top, it has a lot of hate against it. Not in terms of cards, but just in terms of community opinion. Just because it's one of the agendas that's been out the longest, and it's never been an awful choice really, or rarely. So seeing that pop up to the top, I think would probably be a red flag and something we would consider looking at. Because I know it's for the people that like it, they like it pretty regularly, but the people that dislike it, it's pretty intense as well. So I would definitely want to keep an eye on that. I noticed neither of you mentioned Dark Wings. Is my dream of having a tier 1 Dark Wings deck dead?
I don't think, unless Valerian, I think Valerian still is just a better agenda.
I mean, yeah, the opportunity cost of not running Valerian Steel. I think also this is something Will and I talked about in our White Book episode where we went back over the core set. I think that just the way attachments are designed in second edition is way more busted than the way in which events are. I mean, the gold cost of events and the fact that there's no reduction to the cost of events, and I don't.
Well, there is.
Well, I mean, like built into the agenda, right? You know what I
okay.
mean? Like, and the fact that I don't think Danny or Nate figured out how to properly price events. Is another thing. And we were building some Dark Wings decks for a while, and we just found out that there wasn't a good package. I mean, Chris, we had some of these discussions that you were part of with the Long Lances chat, right?
Yeah.
Where the nice thing about Valerian Steel is there's a good neutral package, and then each faction has 3 or 4 really good attachments or mediocre attachments that are good when they attach draw a card to them. And that's not really the case with events. That's what we found. And I think that's kind of what Wama has also said to me about it. And so I just don't think events are there. But one of the nice things about it being legal, of course, is when Hano and CT and y'all are able to design new cards, I think the existence of Dark Wings, and I hope, I honestly really hope that the first thing that your playtesters and your designers do is figure out how to properly cost events. And that's not a condescending thing. That's
Sure.
I think that Danny didn't do it well. I don't think Nate did it well. I think figuring out gold. I think adding gold to events was a really cool design decision, but it made the design space a lot harder to figure out. And I hope that that's something Hano and CT and the rest of your team are able to figure out now that we're running the game.
Yeah, I agree with that. That events have naturally become more difficult to really properly place in terms of the greater economic scale of the game. So hopefully it's something we can that our team can wrap its head around. Neither of you also mentioned Night's Watch. Do you think there's a top tier Night's Watch deck out there? Is it still Steel even with the Halder restriction?
I think Valerian Steel and Builders are both fine. Completely fine.
I mean, the Jontron deck still functions too, right?
Yeah, the Jontron is Valerian Steel 90% of the time, but yeah, it works out of the other agendas too. I don't think they're affected at all. I strongly disagree with Hob being anywhere but the restricted list. Full time, I think it's ridiculous and a busted card, and as long as Night's Watch can play it freely, they're going to be one of the better factions. I just ditch Halder and Yorin and Builders, right? Who cares? I just,
Well, yeah.
I keep Craven and Halder, and then I get back, I haven't thought of the name of this card in forever, but the 4/6/1 that sacks to draw cards.
Return to the Fields.
Return
to the Fields. I get Return to the Fields back. I don't have Yorin, but I have Return, and that deck functions just fine. It loses a bit of tempo. What?
Wait, so you're giving up Halder for Return in Builders?
Because then you also get Hob and Craven.
I mean, you get Hob and Craven if you take Halder's restrictor card too. Like only Yorin has a pod.
I would 100% give up Halder. I think Return is
maybe.
better for that deck. I think Return is better for that deck than Halder, especially because Valar Morghulis is in the meta more with Return restricted.
That's fair. I think
So, I don't know. That might be the best deck. I don't know.
Halder's really good though. If crossing becomes like the go-to aggressive agenda, though, Halder is very helpful in that matchup.
Sure, but a deck of 75 cards that ran 2 Halder, like I'd rather have the 2 plots that I can use anytime I want.
Wait, we're talking about Builders has a 75 card deck?
No.
Because I'm talking about Builders here.
I've been
like,
talking
oh, you're on Valerian Steel now. Sure.
I've been talking about Steel. That's why I said get rid of Yorin and keep Return. I don't care what you do in Builders.
Oh,
Builders
okay. We're talking about Valerian Steel. Slightly confused. I agree. Yes, get rid of Halder.
Not give any kind of shit about Halder. Halder is a nice bonus for Builders, but Builders like Builders is just so tight on synergy that like you need to remove multiple things from them to hit them. Like, yeah, they keep Hob, Craven, and Halter just fine, but like that's just because they don't have a restricted card they give a shit about. Like,
well, trade routes, they do like trade routes. Would be nice to have with those cards.
They like trade routes, so trade routes was nice until they printed the 10 gold plot right at the end of the game.
Yes, yes.
So,
although like the tax does hurt in Builders, but yeah, it can hurt in Builders.
It stopped mattering. Like Eastwatch Carpenter plus all that means it doesn't super matter. Builders should be completely fine. Hopefully, there's enough shadowy jumper stuff. Like Builders has never been especially good against shadows, and I think Assault is still really good.
Is bad against ambush,
yeah. So hopefully that keeps Builders in check. I don't know. I feel like Night's Watch. I'm not mad at like having trouble balancing Night's Watch because Night's Watch is something that FFG never managed to come close to balancing, where they were constantly either completely bust or completely unplayable. I just like there has to be a heavier hand in them because like every other faction has a bunch of different identities, and Night's Watch has always been like, here's a really obvious build around game plan, build around that game plan, go.
I mean, Night's Watch has always had two identities, right? It's had defense plus attrition, right? Like
attrition is not a real Night's Watch deck. Like
Night's Watch Wolf and other like I'm sorry,
that deck was mediocre. Like it was good for a little while. Like it was never one of the top decks in the meta. It was a deck you could play that like won basically nothing outside of a couple straight championships. The deck never mattered. Like Martel always did that deck better. It didn't. Martel did that deck better forever, and it couldn't handle other slow control decks. Like the attrition is cute, it's just not good, and it also nothing from this list.
So you were building with us when we like this is so the opposite. Like Glazer once tried to force us, Scott's in the chat, to play fucking Night's Watch Stag, and all right with fucking Catapult.
That's a stall power deck build. Right? Like, that's literally what I'm arguing. Yes, Night's Watch has always had that same basic identity.
Yeah, that's an old wall deck. It's not the.
It wasn't really an old.
It was old wall and dominance. Then
it was definitely Dom.
Then there's like the John decks, right? Like where your job is to like gain a bunch of power with John, and like there's occasionally the like the variant that Wama had, which is like, well, I'm gonna have the wall in it, but like most of my power gain is gonna be around that stupid John thing.
Yeah, like the most proactive and I think kind of reasonable Night's Watch deck I can remember is like a year or so after Reigns came out, and there was like a Night's Watch Reigns deck that was like the middle John, not Voltron John.
Oh, my favorite John, Wildling John. Yeah, I mean.
So that one was sweet.
That was the Gen Con that
also
that I'm talking about, where we audibled to Night's Watch Reigns.
But that's the thing. It's like that one wasn't as much a wall deck. Like you could easily win without seeing the wall.
Well,
in that deck.
Right. That was classically like what I talk about. It was a mid-range deck with a combo finisher. Right. Frequently, you got to like 10 power, and then you played the wall.
No other faction just has like everything built around one card, and sometimes that one card is the wall. Sometimes that one card is John. For a minute there, the one card was Bound by the Wall, right? Like nothing.
Oh god, that card's so bad.
Yeah, nothing else has ever. No other faction has ever just been like, this card is the faction's identity. in
Sure.
quite the same way. And so unless you want to figure out like some bannings and how to restrict those, it's really hard to balance Night's Watch. So like,
And I think that's something that, to be clear, that like Hano's pretty aware of, and he's already said one of his early goals is to like find a new lane for Night's Watch to take that
mhm.
doesn't involve either of those. So
The
I mean,
I
problem you're
don't
going to
know
run into,
specifically what he's
though,
looking at for that, but
is
that
you
new
have a
lane
lot of
still,
invested players who enjoy the Night's Watch playstyle. Like
they
there
can
are
still play
people.
it. It's not unplayable. It's still maybe the best deck, but like they can do something else that's not. They can build a deck instead of stuff built around a card.
I mean, some people like that. Like, it,
Yeah.
right, but
Again,
it's not
go
going away.
instead
It's Blazer's point.
no, no,
Like,
no. I agree. I agree.
instead of
But
just one way to play it, you could have like two.
well, there's Rangers.
Yeah, there's bad decks,
wait,
right?
Is Mira in chat? Rangers was called. Where's her
She's probably
favorite
watching the Colt
Lloyd
game.
Sim? That's
Uh,
true.
she,
Well, I will invoke the name of Jeremy Riker for her because I know it's her favorite. Yeah.
So I mean, Night's Watch needs an identity, and FFG was just like, you can have a card as an identity, have fun. And everyone else was like, your identity is gold, and drawing, like, everyone else's identity was like this mechanic, or like, I don't have the right word for this because I'm not good enough at game design, right? But everyone else's identity was this like larger scope of the game thing, where Night's Watch was like
mechanics,
a
right,
card.
well, I think the reason for that, right, is because of the decision to like make the initial card pool and still commit as one of Night's Watch themes to this like weird monocon like separation where you get like distinct, like there's a Rangers thing, there's a Stewards thing, there's
Oh,
a Builders thing,
that's
which
the other Night's Watch deck, Stewards, when it existed for that like 2 weeks before.
hey, Martin won a big necked event with that deck. The Rat Cook. It almost caused Kyle Vansel, Maester of Operations, to quit playing Thrones. So, like,
We should have let Rat Cook around for more.
Rat Cook is another one of. There's just so many amazing Nice Watch decks. It is definitely my favorite faction. But I think, but to go back to the game design point of view, I think separating those things out kind of created path dependency, right? We're consciously deciding that we're going to try to make these three themes that are really distinct and don't overlap is going to most likely come down to, okay, there's a good Rangers card, Jeremy Riker. There's a good Builders card, The Wall or Abandoned Stronghold. There's a good Stewards card, The New Gift. And that's going to just cause all the cards to get in orbit because it's really hard to mix them all together. The closest deck that's done that is the Valerian Steel deck, and then of course that's still based around a card of John, or the agenda. You could say that's the agenda that does it. One of those two things. So I think it's just a consequence of the decision to kind of like really bifurcate things between the three different Ranger or Night's Watch traits. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
anyway, let's see. So we talked about Night's Watch. Did we talk about Stark? Glazer had, yeah, we did the Stark fealty. So Greyjoy. So what do we think? I think Greyjoy probably just stays mostly the same, just kind of like firmly tier 1.5, or does Greyjoy Crossing just make a huge jump?
How much mirror are we going to see? Are we going to Mirror Skagos? Because Mirror Skagos screws up Greyjoy's game plan pretty good. If people jump to Mirror Skagos, I think Greyjoy stays where they are. If people keep Pyman and Stark, then I think Greyjoy goes right back up to T1. I think Greyjoy Valerian Steel remains completely awesome too. And if people play that, they will win an awful lot.
Yeah, I think it's hard to disagree with that. I mean, it did warm my heart to hear Mira beating up on Greyjoy cards. That brings me back to the Stark 2019 memories. I do think Shadows going down in flames. But I'm going to ask you about Lannister next. We'll see whether or not Shadows actually goes down in flames. But at least Kingdom of Shadows going down in flames makes Greyjoy a little bit better. Because particularly the mid-range Greyjoy decks, because they could sometimes struggle against Shadows if you weren't able to get off like a key or things like that. So I think Grazer's pretty right about that. That I think it is going to depend on what direction Stark goes into, and also what direction Baratheon goes into. Because I think Baratheon has also shown to be a pretty good answer to mid-range Greyjoy. Chris, anything?
Yeah, no, I think your analysis seems reasonable.
Uh,
It'd be in my dream world. There's still a some sort of strong Drown God deck, but it seems like the consensus is that too many pieces have to be stripped from that for it to be a strong but not completely unfair deck. So maybe that's just not a thing, which is too bad because I feel like for the most part, aside from Drown God, most of the other Greyjoy decks we see are pretty homogenous. Like, yeah,
sure.
the big switch up, but it's mostly just like, and this is coming from me who referred to as mid range Chris on many occasions. Like I'm speaking out here against a mid range faction, so.
They are the dullest mid-range faction, to be fair.
Well,
Yeah.
they have two mid-range identities that I think, despite sharing similar cards, are fairly distinct. They have their like crossing good stuff, and they have their mill power grab. I think those two are distinct enough to warrant separation. Like, at
Yeah,
least
they
they're
require
restricted.
different play patterns to counter them, right? So,
No, in the case they're restricted,
yeah.
which is reasonably big.
Yeah. But I mean,
I think Aloof with that mill package is going to be completely incredible as well. I don't think I said that, but like Aloof with Core Vic and the power grab is just going to be really, really good.
yeah. So why don't we throw it to two factions Glazer's pretty tightly associated with? We'll start with the lesser of the two, Lannister. Do you think Shadow survives with red cards Glazer as like kind of like HRD?
I don't think people will play it, but I think
Tunnels.
it's still
There we go.
T1-ish. Like, I think that HRD Tunnels and I think Lanny Kraken are both still perfectly fine. I think both are probably T1 decks, and I think that outside of like your occasional Radek, people aren't going to play it.
Do you think is still going to be a situation where people are going to miss it, and then Radek is just going to run over people at Vase Bulgar or at the next event, just playing some Shadows build that.
The only thing we've seen stop it was unfortunately Sea of Blood, right? Like he was just playing Lanny Kraken last time. It still beat everything basically but Sea of Blood. It can lose to Night's Watch. Like the Night's Watch game is 50-50. The Stark game is tough, but like if you're good with it, it's a T1 deck, right? Like losing Red Keep sucks until you realize Alchemist Guildhall does the same thing 90% of the time. And it's repeatable, so you can,
Do it in the marshalling, do it in challenges.
Yeah, exactly. So like with that given, like I think Alchemist Guildhall just replaces Red Keep just fine. And then you're just saying, I mean, you don't even need to replace Red Keep. You can run both in HRD, or you could keep the Marauder, which please Nephron restricts, by the way. But you can keep the Winter Time. No, what kind of Marauder is that?
It's
Nighttime.
nighttime.
Time Brothers.
Nighttime. Thank you. Winter Time is the first edition one.
And well, it's in second edition. It's just not legal yet.
Sure, ever. The Nighttime Marauder, you can just run that with the Guildhall if you prefer, out of Lightning Kraken, and be just fine. You're losing control tools, right? But like, FFG just
Is
dedicated
Alchemist
so
Max
much.
once per round?
Is what?
Is Alchemist Max one per round? I have not read the card in a while. So you can't do it twice. So that's good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is good. Okay, so you still get the ones, but it's one free shadow trigger per round at least, right? It's one free shadow trigger plus one big cancel per round. So instead of two cancels, one cancel is better than two, right?
Yep,
like,
it is max. Yeah.
This is still a step up. I just think
Good catch. Chad.
I think it's really good. It's just, we'll see if people can be bothered with it when it's not OP busted. Because I don't think it's OP busted, right? Like, because Kingdom was OP busted. Like, any idiot could just be like, duh, look at all the tools that you can't interact with, and I can just do this all day. But now, like, you have to have thought and play it carefully. The builds are there. Like, what's it do to one Stalic 2 years ago? Was it 2 years ago?
2 years
Dutch guy.
ago?
Dutch guy.
I don't recall. I'm
Well,
very bad at
But
these.
he played basically my Lanny HRD and published it, and that deck is just freaking fine.
yeah,
Like
I mean,
he played it at this style. Like he basically, I think he made like top 8 or something. I don't wish I remembered his name, but it's been a while. But yeah, like that deck is published. If you edit it, it's still totally a fine deck. Lanny Kraken takes you basically find space for 12 Kraken cards, and you're fine. Like this
there's
is,
good ones.
I mean,
Um,
you run 3 Wintertime Marauders, 3 of the Shadow Location,
you
and
mean
then
nighttime marauders, not wintertime?
Nighttime Marauder, sure. 3 Hagen's Daughter, and then like you mix and match a
The
little
night
bit.
flare. You're forgetting night flare.
Yeah, and then you mix and match a bit for the last one where you can screw around.
Yeah. I
There's
definitely
the
agree.
one that
Lanny
steals 2
Kraken is still good.
locations.
I really enjoy, like, of those Shadows decks. I think Lanny HRD was the most fun I had playing Shadows. I hope that they move back towards the builds playing the event. That lowers the cost of cards you bring out of Shadows by 3. I think that event is really fun. It's really cool. But I know that the Shadows decks moved away from that.
Very large shadows or whatever.
Yeah, very small shadow, or something
No, it's
like
very
that.
large.
Very large
It's
shadow.
the name is quite on the nose, regardless.
Yeah, it's a super fun event, and just really cool to do with bowels. So yeah,
I was right. Very large shadow.
a very low shadow. Yeah, and yeah, I think Lanny Kraken is definitely probably going to be really strong. So I'll toss it also to you, Glazer, about Martell. Are we going to see Martell Lion be the big predator on Martell? Besides Martell Wars, which remains untouched and still that firmly like
I don't think Martell Lion works.
playable deck.
I mean, it keeps Flea Bottom, right? Like it desperately needs Flea Bottom. So I don't think that deck is especially good. I think that Martell Wars is basically where everyone's going to go for Martell, unfortunately. I think Martell is very likely the weakest faction outside of that. I just don't see what they have to do that can't be done better elsewhere.
You don't think there's a Hollow Hill build?
No. I don't think Martell Hollow Hill has ever really been good. I think it was okay for a little while. I think Hollow Hill was always better out of Targ and Stark. And now Stark gets back their tricks for Hollow Hill, right? Like Stark Hollow Hill really needed Skagos.
Well, a question from Scotty in chat: is Wolf back?
No. Like, why would Wolf be back?
Skagos is unrestricted. Dorn is unrestricted.
It never ran Skagos, so that would not help.
I'm trying to think.
You don't think Skagos for Ramsey is worthwhile?
No.
Skagos for Renzi and Ward, because you can run
cute.
Ward as a restricted.
Yeah, it's cute. You do run Ward as your restricted. It's cute. It's just not good. No, Martell Wolf isn't back. It'll be like a solid 1.5 deck. It's been a solid 1.5 deck since all the restrictions, but no. Like, it's like Flea Bottom Ward and then having to suck it up with the bad gold plots is probably too much. It's a Westeros Bleeds from being good, so if you all want to make that legal, if you ever want me to play again, that would be a decent way to get close, right? Like,
Yeah, Scotty's saying Secret Schemes is still here too.
Notes.
yeah,
Make notes.
like the cards are there. It's fine. It's just like you're losing. You don't have Desert Raider. And Flea Bottom,
Yeah, because Desert
right?
Raider was in the World Championship version, right? I can't
Yeah.
remember. Yeah, okay.
So you're losing Desert Raider and Flea Bottom and Trade Routes for Ward, which is fine, but like it's just I don't know. Like the meta would have to slow down a lot. Like Barra would have to completely disappear because like Barra Assault like giggles all like right in the face of Martell Shadows, right? Like it's just.
I mean, Barra Maesters also doesn't care about
Yeah.
a lot of the things Martell Wolf is trying to do.
All of it is super duper duper reliant on the Varys combos. I just don't really see it. I think the deck David's playing is still good. The Martell Wolf Stag has lost basically nothing and it's perfectly acceptable.
Beautiful deck.
I don't like what he did with the blots, but I think that deck is still probably T1, and he's shown it can be played fast enough at this point. Like since Germany basically rolled through until today, I have no idea if they won or lost their final game today, but Germany rolled through and he was part of the team that was winning like 7-1 every time with that deck. Um, I think that deck is still really good, but again, like if crossing and knights get better, then that deck's going to get worse and has to run a bunch more stall to work. Um, Martel might have an assault from the shadows, but I think that's probably too slow. I bet you Martel has an aloof and apart, but that's just the wars deck, and
So
Martel Kraken exists. And then I don't think you guys did anything to the Martel Lion combo thing.
I'm going to be honest and tell you I'm not aware of what the Martel Lion combo deck is. So
It's
was that the
Yo
thing Adamo was playing?
no, it's Yotam's deck.
Yotam's.
Adamo was playing Martel Kraken.
Martel Kraken,
Um,
right. That's
let's
still
see.
that's a combo deck too.
Yeah. I don't think anything was done to it. If people want to play it, it's still good. It's still there. It's not like it's a super stall. Like it's a plot 8 combo, so like you could beat it. It's not unbeatable, but like it's very, very well protected and it's really good. So like that's 100% worth messing with as well. Um, I don't know.
If
Martel has a bunch of janky shit, I think. Like some good players can make janky shit work, right? Like if Leonard wants to show up with Marcel Lion combo bullshit, he's going to win a bunch of games because he's really, really good. But I think they're extremely high skill cap for their reward level.
what about HRD Starfall? So if the meta is coalescing around mid-rangey
Too slow.
decks,
It's just too slow. That deck's never going to like until we get new cards. That deck's not going to work.
you don't think it's not?
Like, I'm the top 5 fastest players in the world, and I couldn't win on time with that deck. So no.
I mean, even in a meta full of like if it becomes like Greyjoy and Stark, like
I mean,
that's like
Greyjoy-
that's what it was built to prey
right.
on.
Greyjoy is fast, and it like Greyjoy is fast and has a bunch of Tricons and is a giant pain in the ass. Stark has Skagos.
That's fair. That's true. It didn't have Skagos when we were playing it, right? Skagos
Like
had
the
just been
deck,
restricted.
the deck was cool, but it's not good. It's the slowest thing in human history.
Well, speaking of things that are not slow, a friend of the stream, former a next champion Adamo, asked me this question when I was streaming the World Cup game yesterday. Free Folk. Do we think that? I mean, Glazer, Chris, Chris, you played it at Gen Con. The three of us have tested it a decent amount. It was pretty good as a meta call, but one of its big predators, of course, was Kingdom of Shadows. Some people say Sea of Blood, but I don't think so. I think you could win the Sea of Blood matchup. It was very coin flippy. Like if you saw your ridiculous claim on turn 1 and they didn't see their ridiculous claim on turn 1, you won. And if they saw their ridiculous claim on turn 1, you didn't, you lost. Both of those predators, though, are out of the system. So do we think, and nothing was, right? I guess none of the card, maybe Return to the Fields?
yeah, I think it had return, if
Um,
I recall correctly.
but as an answer to resets, but could that be your restricted card? Like, I mean,
There was no restricted card in our Gen Con list, right?
Right, yeah, that's true. There was-
So yeah, it's fine just saying, look, we have a restricted card now. Yeah, it's probably still T1. I don't know. I don't see why it wouldn't be. Hopefully Barra Assault can beat it, but I don't know. Maybe.
definitely
Yeah, that's an interesting
Neil cards
question.
beat it.
Night's Watch Valerian Steel is real good against it too. So,
True.
So if people still play that, that'll do it.
Yeah, I think like again, Neil is pretty good against it. Burn is also pretty good against it. Rattleshirt is a great card unless he's sitting sideways before you initiate challenges, and then you're just like, oh, I spent all of my gold on Rattleshirt.
Well, they got that new card that John the whole reason that John originally built the deck. I can't think of which card it was.
Tormund is it Tormund? He wasn't legal for Gen Con, right?
Yeah, it was.
Correct,
Tormund was not legal for Gen Con, and John kept building the deck with Tormund, and we kept having to tell him that Tormund wasn't legal. And you would build it, and Tormund would be there. It's like that's not legal. That's why you didn't fucking build it. Like the obvious deck. And then 2 weeks later, he'd be like, "Guys, I figured it out."
It's Tormund.
And then he's like, "This card is busted," and we were like, "Not." Just yeah, but it turns out it was busted anyway. Yeah, I don't see why it's not T1. Luckily, the Conclave can immediately just be like, you know what, fuck that, let's ban it. That'll be the third ban.
I think Free Folk is there's still the tools to keep it in check. Because as we learned, it was one of the few times I think in Thrones that a hard meta call really kind of helped a team succeed like that. Like, not playing the tier 1 deck. Obviously, we didn't bring Greyjoy Prince or Greyjoy. What was it? Crossing was the other thing that was popular at the time. It was Prince or Crossing. And we, 3 people in the top 16, right? And Dan in the finals.
More than that.
Right? 4?
It was more than 3.
Was it 4?
How many people
I
played
think
it?
it was 4.
Every single one.
Yeah. It was 4, right? Chris, Clemens, Dan, and
John.
Yeah.
So
I feel like there was supposed to be someone else who was going to play it.
Drown God, right, was the other thing. That was Drown God was Drown God still legal then?
Yeah, Drown God was Emberly.
Oh, that's right. Emberly was the other. That's right. Emberly was the other. Was the other person? Yeah. Again, old man brain. So I think we've talked through just about everything that we would need to go over, right? Is there anything sort of big picture-y that stands out to you all that we might have missed?
We don't think Drown God really works.
Yeah, I don't think it does.
Answering that.
Yeah,
it was legal until after US Nats.
It was answering the Nats question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that's relevant? I tend not to think so. I think Tyrell is a really good faction. I think Lannister is good if people play it. I'm worried that people will not try to play those two, but I think that they're both. I don't think they're significantly behind Targ, Stark, Greyjoy, and Night's Watch. I think all of those factions work just fine.
So here's a question on that note for you, Glazer. Do you think that Hightower being unrestricted, like what percentage of Tyrell decks just immediately put it back in, and what percentage are like too low to the ground for it?
Only Assault, I think. Although there's a potential for Tyrell Wolf, I suppose. That never really super cared about Flea Bottom, I don't believe. So that could just go back to Ward and be fine, I think.
Tyrell Hollow Hill with Hightower?
Maybe. I don't know how to build that. If that's good, it's out of my.
That might be a Wama thing to do. Sounds like something James would do.
James
definitely sounds like a Wama deck.
It does not. James will not build a Hollow Hill deck. He thinks the agenda is terrible.
It's green cards though. He's built like every green deck that exists.
He's not played Tyrell Hollow Hill.
That's fair. I don't know how good 4 drop locations are in that. I guess you don't have to worry about protect. I guess the big thing, right, the Hightower is going for it, is with Sea of Blood banned, you don't have to worry about protecting it the same way you had to, even if, say, this was the same restricted list, but Sea of Blood was still restricted rather than banned.
Yeah, you don't have fetchable torch every
turn round, right? Chris, you have that setup turn with Hightower that you didn't have access to before.
You played Tyrell Assault, right? Like, Hightower was restricted in versions of that, right? Like,
yeah, I think you're right.
It was our restricted card in the version that Chris played at Red Saturday.
Yeah, like you keep that and you get another toy. Like whether that be Great Hall. Actually, Great Hall wouldn't have been restricted then, so I guess it's just Great Hall. But like that deck is perfectly fine. Like everything else about that deck works real well. And there's no
Guile's restricted now though.
What?
Guile's restricted now.
Guile wasn't out when I played that.
Oh, Guile wasn't out?
Guile didn't exist. I mean, the deck runs like 6 actual Shadows cards. It doesn't run enough Shadows cards to give a shit about Guile anyway. I also don't think Tyrell Faith is especially good.
Oh, that's like very much like the white whale of certain aspects of our build group. Like we've been trying to make that deck work for a while. Scotty's in chat; he can talk about that.
But like everything that beat it is gone. So like I don't see, and it's got the make everything 3 strength going for it again. I don't see why Tyrell.
That plot is really powerful.
I mean, it could even keep Guile as it's restricted. Like there's no reason for it not to, right? Guile isn't banned. I'm not crazy, right?
Nope, it's just restricted, and Sparrows is not.
Yeah, so you just Sparrows Guile, and problem is solved, right? Like I don't see why that deck isn't really good. I'm not, unless I'm missing something. I'm not thinking of any real natural predators.
I mean, there's still gonna be crossing decks.
Of course, crossing doesn't stop that. It takes all the power from crossing. Like, I got power. You're like, oh, thank you.
can live on
Like
my.
now I sparrows all that power. Thank you for generating it into the game.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
see Scott's in the chat telling us it's great for that deck. So
you know,
maybe I mean again
never
there are
playing
very
like
few
that.
things that would make me happier than my good friend Scott Levine playing Tyrell Faith in a tournament and
Yeah,
have success with it. So well, he could have the upcoming Feast for Crows 2 on July 11th, or he could play.
that's
Vase Bulgar next weekend on July 4th. So those are the two big upcoming tournaments. In fact, if you put !feast into chat right now, you can sign up. And possibly, let me put the restricted list back. You get, it's being run exactly the same way that Storm of Starpike was, which is it's free to enter. Top 8 gets prizes sent to them by Maester of the Americas, the one and only Chris Vack. So, we got cool art and stuff right there. So, yeah. So, we haven't talked a little bit about it, but this is sort of a question also for Chris about this is, are you a little bit worried that you were too gentle to combo? Like, I mean, I think that, like, Annals, Wheels, Old Town Informer all being a pod together is good, but a bunch of the other, like, weird combo cards are pulled off. Is there a way to, like, build, like, is Alex Black, like, sitting out there going, I have my combo ready to pass off to one of my friends now
I mean,
that
we
some of these
banned
things...
5 cards from combo. I don't know what more you want. Like,
some of the ladies stuff is still is back to being unrestricted, right?
sure, but only the stuff that, like, you don't have meddling to, like, go find the events. You don't have Rose Banner. Like, there's so many tools that got taken away from combo that I think it's okay. And if somebody figures out a combo deck, more power to them. To be honest, like, it feels. I don't think we were particularly gentle to combo, but I could be. Could
No,
be
I don't think you
mistaken.
were. I mean, you banned 5 cards, but I mean, it's just one of those things where it's a dangerous thing to let out into the wild. As it took like 3 different restricted lists before those cards, like that deck finally got like fully murdered, if I remember correctly. I mean, even if you include the Tyrell Dragon that Sandy was running around with for part of 2019, like that deck survived into like a version of that kind of combo deck survived until the game was a few months away from losing FFG support. So
Yeah, I just feel like we've cut off enough angles, especially economically. Like, all men are fools is still restricted. Meddling is banned.
Hey, talk
Rose
like
Banner
that'll
is
get you
banned.
banned from Facebook.
okay. Anything else that you all want to say as a wrap up before
Nah,
we?
let's go play some Magic.
Cool. I am going to. Jess, is Trey's is Trey still streaming, or did we get or is Colt won or lost his game? Folks who are watching, let me know in chat, because if so, I will. Colt just won. Well, congratulations to Colt. So I will not just go immediately host.
Congratulations to Team America, who just won 5-4.
5-4, narrowly
For the
pulled it
top
out
4.
over
Yeah.
the Czechs. So that puts them in the top 4, right?
Top 4? Yeah. I believe they get that big Germany match that they wanted since last year.
Cool.
Yikes. That'll be exciting.
Yeah, so, well, that'll be exciting, and Trey will be providing excellent commentary over at his channel /Trey Alsop, twitch.tv/Trey Alsop. Yep, Germany is up next. That's definitely going to be a grudge match to end all grudge matches in Thrones. Two of the big Thrones countries in the Eurosphere pounding it out to see which one's better. So who's on the other side of the bracket?
Someone just beat England. Was it the Czechs?
No, well, maybe,
Or
but we just beat the Czechs. So
not the Czechs. No, someone just beat England, and I don't remember the other team.
Make them de-sleeve. It doesn't matter. We're gonna win. Well, I mean, it is good to know who's on the other side of the bracket, though, right? But I don't know the bracket, the bracketology off the top of my head. But so make sure that if you want to follow all the things that are going on with the World Cup. With Team USA, Trey's been doing a great job streaming with a variety of different commentating partners over at twitch.tv/TreyAlsup. Make sure that you go to agot.cards to get the latest updates from the Conclave and listen to, of course, the upcoming White Book episode where Will and I will be digging in even more deeply about this restricted list stuff. Maybe we can bring Glazer out of retirement to, I don't know, build a restricted list deck or something. No, he's shaking his head.
No.
He only does props and slops these days.
I was gonna do it. I'm not doing another hour of repeating everything I said here. Like, y'all heard my opinion. If you
We
want,
all did hear your opinion.
Drop me a message.
If you can't get enough of it, I will be, of course, streaming Feast for Crows here on July 11th. If you would like to sign up, you can sign up. You can start signing up right now. I believe at around 9:30, Feast for Crows 2's Facebook event went up. So I believe also Aaron Glazer will be commentating with me on the 11th. So we'll be back again for another one of these fun Saturdays. I really enjoy doing them. Chris, you got anything you want to say before we log off?
Not really. I just I'm pleased to see all the enthusiasm about this list. So hopefully that will translate into people getting some games in, brewing with the new list, and having fun with the game. I know this whole COVID thing is kind of put a damper on our hot start, if you will. But hopefully, once America gets their heads out of their asses and starts wearing masks, we can all get back to seeing each other again.
Oh, so never. Cool.
I will say though, like, really huge amounts of credit to like the online organizers, the Spanish,
Absolutely.
In particular. I've been doing tons of tournaments. Chris Vack, Ibri out in the on the West Coast.
Oh my God. End the cast.
I'm going to keep saying this. Now I'm definitely not going to do it. But I want to say that the online people have done a good job. All right. Good night. Take care. Thank you, Aaron and Chris, for joining me. Take care. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Wear your masks. Black Lives Matter.
See you in 2 weeks, people. Black Lives Matter.
Agreed. Switch this over. All right. You're muted, Aaron. I'm muted.